What is going on, everyone? Welcome to the Slaw Sports Show. I'm your host, as always, Cole Noble, aka Slaw. And as you see it here behind us, we're going to be continuing our 2022 NFL Draft prospect breakdowns and analysis leading up to the NFL Draft on April 28th for the first round. So today we are going to be discussing the big boys on the offensive line. And joining us for the third week in a row to continue to break down what concludes our offensive section of the prospect breakdown is Matt Laguza. So we'll bring him in. Matt, third week in a row. How are we feeling leading up to the NFL Draft right now?
I'm getting excited. We're almost there. I'm coming back to the homeland next week, and we're getting ready for American football to come back into my life. This is just getting me more excited by the week.
Well, Matt, today we're talking the big boys, the guys up front that do all the dirty work. You know, no play in the NFL happens without these guys. No play actually starts in the NFL without these guys. And we got a big class coming in. I mean, big, talking about these offensive linemen. So just to get us started, what do you think of this group coming in, this position group going into the draft this year?
I think it's really strong, really in all areas from the outside to the inside. It's very balanced in that way where you've got some guys that can start day one and make an impact on any NFL team in whatever spot you need. So throughout the first round, and I think into the second, maybe the third round, you're going to get some really quality guys. But the people that we're focusing on today, these are the guys that if you get them in the first round, they can make an immediate impact on your team. And hey, I'm excited to watch these guys work.
All right, let's go ahead and get straight into our analysis on these prospects. I think we have 8 that we're going to discuss today. Might throw in a few more at the tail end of it, but 8 guys that look like they're going to be the potential first-round guys on the first day of the draft. And first one is the Alabama tackle, Evan Neal. So we're going to begin with Evan Neal, a guy who, bring it up here, 6'7", 350 pounds. The guy is enormous as an offensive tackle. Has a lot of great size and athleticism. He was a top recruit going out of IMG Academy. And then, of course, obviously going and landing with Alabama, one of the premier, and maybe the premier college football program in the country. Just coming out of there where, they produce talent time and time again coming out of Alabama, especially on the offensive line. Pass protection, an area that he can improve on, in my opinion. Not really, as you would expect to be the top tackle in past years, how, perfect of a prospect they are in years past. You think about last year with Penny Sewell and also Rashawn Slater coming into the draft. Those guys look near perfect as you can get. But Neal still looks like a guy who's going to be an instant day one starter on the offensive line and easily going to fall in that 1 to 3 pick range in the first round.
You're talking about big guys. Evan Neal is a big man. Now, that's his strength and his weakness. Now, he lost 15 pounds over the offseason, which has made him a lot quicker, which is good. But, considering how big he is, weight could be an issue down the line. So he's got to be able to keep that good weight that he's at right now if he wants to continue to succeed. But no, he's great in the run game. He's going to be a great pass protector if he can improve his technique just a little bit. But I'm interested to see where he goes because there's been a lot of conversation about him through this process. He's been moving a lot. At one point we thought he was going 1 to the Jaguars, but then they re-signed Robinson. And, we're not sure anymore. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with him. But I agree. I think he's a 1 to 3 guy. I don't think he's getting past Houston.
Yeah, and I mean, the big thing, with this size, how massive he is, 6'7", 350. People are wondering how well he was going to adjust in the NFL to NFL pass rushers. You got guys coming off the edge like Myles Garrett who are just absolute freaks. How is he going to be able to step up in year one as a rookie and handle those guys? But watching his tape, I thought he did a good job using his length against power rushers, more of like a Max Crosby type or a Chandler Jones, both guys on the Raiders now. But just that's what I think of with power rushers or, the speed guys like a Myles Garrett to watch out for. He also had great foot quickness, on the edge of that offensive line, being able to get around and really anchor those guys, on the outside of the offensive line. There were times watching it where I felt like, he kind of sinked his weight a little bit on the edge, got a little bit too aggressive pursuing a guy, and over lunged and completely just missed a block at times. But overall, all those negatives aside, great prospect. You're going to really build this guy the way you want to, and he's going to be a quarterback's best friend on the offensive line. I mean, you talk about, I'm wearing the Packers shirt here today, a left tackle quarterback relationship, like David Bakhtiari and Aaron Rodgers for my Green Bay Packers. That's important for a team and for a quarterback. And you talked about how he had the Jaguars initially at the beginning of this process, getting Evan Neal first overall, because that'd be great, for a guy like Trevor Lawrence, a young quarterback in this league. But Houston, the same way. And, a lot of teams in that top 5 definitely need a tackle to protect their young quarterbacks. Daniel Jones with the Giants, Zach Wilson with the Jets, even Davis Mills. If you want to build around him in Houston, here's a guy that's going to be a focal point of that offensive line from day one. So I like the guy, and I like how he is being rightly placed here at the top 3 to 5 in this year's draft.
And there's one thing that I think gives him a huge advantage is the fact that he played at Alabama and he gets to play against the top talent in college football. So he's been able to go against the Aiden Hutchinson. He's been able to go against just the top edge rushers in not just this class, but just in college football as a whole. So he's going to have a huge advantage on some of these other guys that just don't get to play that kind of level of competition. He's going to be able to know what he needs to do to improve. And that's going to be something that coaches are going to look at and say, look, he's already faced this elite talent. He's been able to face the guys that these other teams that we're playing against, they're drafting them this year. So he just kind of has that one little advantage of being that much better than the others that he got the Alabama offer. So that I think that's huge for him going into this process.
And the one thing, I think is the new trend in the NFL this year, and something that's going to be a little bit of a knock on Evan Neal. And it's something that, honestly, I think would have made Rashawn Slater the top offensive lineman last year, who should have been drafted over Penei Sewell. And it's the versatility of the offensive line that teams are valuing a lot, more especially in the past few drafts. And I think that's not going to change. I think that's going to continue for the future of the league. Versatile guys up front that can play, 3 to even 5 positions. But Evan Neal, mostly Alabama, just started at right and left tackle. Never went inside at guard. So it's going to be interesting to see how teams value that. But I mean, like I said, you're just as good as your left guard is at quarterback, your left tackle is at quarterback, protecting your blind side. So still huge value in the position, but it's something that will affect him compared to other prospects that maybe one guy in particular might leap above him, and it might be this guy over here behind me.
Yeah, definitely. And again, that makes complete sense. You look at guys like Ickey, who we're going to talk about later, guys like Bernhard Raimann, who can really play multiple positions. And we've seen that throughout the NFL now, just with it. Your guy, Billy Turner, didn't he play all 5 positions on the offensive line for the Packers last year?
It was Elton Jenkins.
Elton Jenkins. Elton Jenkins played all 5 positions for the Packers when everybody kept getting hurt. And that's what teams need. They don't want a guy that can just play in that one singular position. Now, it's great to have a guy that can be your cornerstone left tackle and can be that, but you want to be able to have the opportunity to move him around, because in 3 years, he might not be the guy that you want at left tackle, but he has the skill to be able to play in another position. But if he is not able to convert his play to that position, it's going to hurt him in the end.
Mm-hmm, for sure. I mean, there's still easily a market for left tackles. I mean, you look at the contract that Teron Armstead got this year with the Miami Dolphins. That lets you know that teams are still valuing the position very heavily. And like the Jaguars, franchise tagging Cam Robinson, making sure that he's locked in place for at least another year is important to consider. But let's move on to the guy we just briefly talked about, talk about him more heavily, and it's Ikem Ekwonu out of NC State, our next guy on the board here, talking about these big guys on the offensive line. And Icky is the guy that you want as a multi-tackle guard offensive lineman, experienced playing it all at NC State, a guy who has a nasty play style that I absolutely loved. He was on Good Morning Football, I believe, this week, talking about his pancakes that he had at NC State, getting syrup bottles for every single pancake. By the end of his time at NC State, had over 200 syrup bottles from the amount of pancakes that this guy had. This guy's thick, powerful, pass protection, quick, has a great punch to stun edge rushers. A lot to like about Ikem Ekwonu, especially for me. The dual position ability at both guard and tackle is something that I really like about Ikem Ekwonu.
And talking about versatility, not can he play inside and outside, but he can pretty much fit into any offensive scheme that you want to run. He's a good run blocker, he's a good pass blocker, and he just offers he's just a fit in any team that wants him. So you go up there and you need an offensive lineman, doesn't matter what position, what scheme you're running on offense, he's a guy that can fill a hole for you immediately. And I love him. He's quick, he's really flexible, he's got good acceleration. For a big guy, he's quick. And that's something that you love to see in an offensive lineman, especially an interior guy, being able to get to the outside if needed to get that lead block on a pull. It's really good. So I'm excited for him. He's a guy that if the Jaguars don't go Evan Neal at 1, he's a guy that could possibly leapfrog Evan Neal and go to a team like the New York Jets, like the Giants, like the Texans, who aren't desperate need of a cornerstone left tackle. They're not in desperate need of it. They're more of a guy that needs to fill a spot immediately, a guy that can play where they need. So Ikem Ekwonu could be that guy if the Jaguars are not the ones to take Evan Neal.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, from what I've been reading, especially the last 2 days, is that Doug Peterson is absolutely blown away by Ikem Ekwonu and would love to have him in Jacksonville. But I think the problem is Trent Baalke just can't justify taking him at number 1. And I think that's when there's a lot of smoke right now this past week about Travon Walker, trying to get someone to get juiced up to move to 1 to allow the Jaguars to slide back and take Ikem Ekwonu and incur a couple more picks in the process. That's what I've been reading, through the smoke, through the tea leaves. I think is what they want to happen. The problem is I don't think they're going to find a suitor for that number 1 pick that is going to try to jump above them to bite on an Aiden Hutchinson or Travon Walker at 1. And I honestly don't know if the Jaguars are going to risk taking Icky at 1 instead of one of these top 2 defenders. But there's definitely some interest there. But like you said, if he doesn't go to the Jaguars, easily going to go 4 to the Jets. Team up with Elijah Vera Tucker, who they took last year in the first round. They already got Mekhi Becton, who they're high on at left tackle. Or also the Giants as well. Just need more help on that offensive line. A multi-positional guy, dual position ability, someone that they would really love to have. And you talked about the speed. I mean, also the size. 6'4", 320. Not as big. 30 pounds less than Evan Neal when he weighed in, but still he has the speed and size where he can play edge, but also has the speed where he can pull, like you were saying, at guard. Some outside run plays, that type of stuff. So a lot to like about this guy. He's going to come in and be phenomenal in the league, multi-time Pro Bowler in my opinion, for years to come.
There's no question about it. I think he could possibly be the most talented offensive lineman in this draft. I think obviously, as we mentioned, Evan Neal has the size, he's got the skill, he's got the big name Alabama team, he's got that. Ikem Ekwonu, he's got the potential, he's got the quickness, he's got all the skill necessary to play the position. So I'm excited to see where these two guys go. As you said, I think both of them could be multi-time Pro Bowlers. Both of them going to be all pros at some point, I think. Ikem Ekwonu, I think, is going to end up being the number 1 tackle that comes out of this class.
Yeah.
Offensive line.
Yeah, for sure. It could even be, the best tackle. If
It could be.
that's where they decide to put him at.
Yeah.
But one thing, do have to? I'm the guy of negatives over here. We've learned the last 3 weeks,
Hey, you
but
got to talk about it.
yeah. But one thing I have noticed watching the tape with Icky, I talked about how has a nasty play style. Sometimes that does get the better of him. Sometimes can be a
Yeah.
little too aggressive at times. That he needs to cut it a little bit more control over that. Try not to get some penalties or over lunge, that kind of stuff. But football character, he's great. I mean, this guy, everyone loves him. The coaches rave about
He's
him,
a block
players rave about him. His interviews are fantastic. I loved him this week on Good Morning Football. He would be a guy I would draft if I was a GM with one of the top 5 picks. I would make sure to go out of my way to get this guy if he's there on my board.
Yeah, no question about it. I'm excited to watch him play, excited to see where he does go and play and see how they use him. That's the most exciting part about him, just how teams are going to use him, where he plays most, what kind of scheme he ends up playing in. I'm just excited to see what he can do at the NFL level.
All right, let's keep it going with these tackles and talk about the second or third, however we classify Icky, but go with our next guy at offensive tackle. It's going to be Charles Cross out of Mississippi State, bringing him up here on the graphic. Charles Cross, another guy I like, a guy who's also been projected at a lot of different spots in the first round. I think when I pulled it up, I think I had him going to the New York Giants at 5 is what I had in my most recent mock draft. Getting a surefire tackle in place on that edge for Daniel Jones in that offense. But I mean, I've seen mock drafts where Charles Cross is going in the late 20s. So another guy in this just insane draft this year, where the prospect projections are absolutely all over the place. But another guy who was a top recruit coming out of high school, going in, had a couple offers, but ended up choosing Mississippi State over schools like Florida State and USC. So ended up with the Bulldogs in Mississippi State. Another guy I like, just the blend of size, length, and balance at tackle that you really rely on. A little bit on the lighter side for what you would expect for a traditional tackle. I mean, 6'5", 310. I mean, compare that again with Evan Neal, a guy who is literally 6'7", 350 pounds. Just shows how much of a monster Evan Neal is. But Cross, still has the ideal size, pass protection, pretty decent foot quickness, always attached to his blocks. Just reading off my reports, but a guy who I think falls within the top 10 to 15. That's the lowest I see him going if he starts to fall. But overall, I don't see a fall really happening just because of how valuable this type of position could be for a team.
See, I struggle with Charles Cross. I'm not really sure about him. I've been flip-flopping between, when we're talking about offensive tackle position, I flip-flop between him and Trevor Penning. I really like Trevor Penning, and we're going to talk about him later. But Charles Cross, for me, he just lacks the athleticism at the position. I feel like he just doesn't have the same he just doesn't have the same athleticism as a guy like Evan Neal, as a guy like Ike Ekwonu, as a guy like Trevor Penning. He's got average foot placement. He does have quick feet. I'm not going to say that. He's inconsistent in his positioning occasionally. And he's a great player. Don't get me wrong. He's a top 3 tackle in this draft behind it's Evan Neal, Trevor Penning, and Charles Cross for me. Those are my top 3. Evan Neal, obviously number 1. Those other 2, they just flip flop for me. I'm just not completely sold past Evan Neal when we're talking about offensive tackles strictly. I think they're all first round talent. I think they all can be starting players in this league, but I'm just not entirely sure who's going to be that number 2 guy.
Yeah, I mean, I completely respect it. I mean, that's looking at my weaknesses, I was going to get to it as well. I mean, just not really the athlete you would envision taking with the top pick. But still a guy where he does do some of the things right. I mean, his hand placements, getting strong attachments on pass rushers, really timing it up. Body control, something that's, another big strength for him. So it's going to be what can they get out of his athleticism. At the end of the day, for some of these teams, are they going to be able to work with this and decide can they make this work for their offense? He'll be one that's going to be interesting to watch for sure, where he ends up and also how he performs once we get into his rookie year and building upon that throughout the rest of his career. So a lot of interesting things for Charles Cross. It's kind of a weird comparison mix-up thing. I mean, Lance Zierlein has Tristan Wirfs and Taylor Moton as Taylor Moton's physicalness and then Tristan Wirfs' play as his comp for Charles Cross, which honestly is pretty favorable in my opinion as a comparison. That's speaking very highly from a lot of what I've seen, but this guy can neutralize power rushers, which is the big thing, but he's not necessarily the athlete to take on speed rushers. So he's going to have a fault in his game coming into it that teams are going to have to consider whether or not he's worth a top 5 to top 10 selection.
Yeah, no, it's going to be, for me, it's going to be a pick-by-pick basis. You're going to see teams come up that are going to be looking for an offensive tackle, and they're going to look at him, and they're going to compare him to who is on the board at their pick. And they're going to think, does he fit into our scheme? Will we be able to deal with his athleticism? And is the player that we could select over him, is he going to be worth more? And I think the lack of athleticism could end up hurting him, but depending on the team who's on the clock, what kind of scheme they run, he could end up getting in that favor. It's just all going to depend on what team is on the clock and who else is left on the board at that point. It's just all going to come down to that for him, I think, in this draft. He can go, for me, anywhere between 5 and 20, 22, something like that. Because remember, it's the NFL draft. Anything can happen. There are going to be trades. There are going to be wild turns of events. The Saints have 2 first-round picks, which means random players are going to get selected. So you just never know. But no, he's a talented player, and I'm excited to see what he can do.
Yeah, I mean, Charles Cross, he looks like a draft to need instead of drafting the best player available. And that's what teams are going to consider. Like when they get on the clock, they're going to look at their board and they're going to look at, the players available. And, right next to that is their needs. What do they need for their roster? And are they going to say, okay, we need a tackle more than anything? I don't care what's on the board. We need a tackle. And the only team that would honestly think about it that way would be the Giants. Yeah. But they're at a point with their roster where they're not at the point to be drafting, for one position. They need to be drafting whoever the best player on the board is because they have so many holes on their roster. Now, a team like the Saints, that would be a team where they say, hey, we have 2 first-round picks. We have a need here at tackle now with Teron Armstead gone, and Charles Cross is sitting right here. That's a team where it would make sense, but he's definitely a need-based player or need-based prospect and draft prospect than a best player available until you start getting into the 20s.
Because, yeah, you see teams like the Saints, yes, they have fallen off since, Drew Brees is gone. Sean Payton is now gone. But they can still be in playoff contention if they make the right moves. So if you lost Teron Armstead, you lost some of your best tackles, you could go with a pick and go with a guy like Charles Cross to protect your quarterback because you do not have the talent at the receiver position right now to be able to compete. You're going to need to give your quarterback time for the routes to develop and to get open receivers. So that could be a guy that they go for and say, you know what? Yes, he might not have everything that we want in a tackle. There might be someone that could help him in another position. But right now, he's the best tackle available, and he is going to affect how our offense plays. So that could be an interesting spot if he does fall into those late teens. But, yeah, no, teams like the Saints are going to be the ones that are really going to be looking for him after the 10th pick.
Yeah, well said. So let's move on to the next guy on the board, and we're going to go with another guard here before we get to your guy at tackle that you really like. But we're going to go first with Kenyon Green out of Texas A&M. So pulling the graphic up here on Kenyon Green, another guy, 6'4", 325, good size, good tangibles. at the position. Especially at guard, a honestly powerful guard, but also another guy who is versatile. Not to the extent of a prospect like Ike Ekwonu is, but a lot of the same characteristics that you see in him to a lesser extent. This is a guy who played 4 of the 5 positions on the offensive line in 2021. Just in one season. You talked about Elton Jenkins playing all 5 in 1 year. This guy did a similar thing, playing 4 of the 5 positions, but he's at his best at guard. Very good anchor against power rushers on the inside. In the run game, can wash defenders straight down the track. Really just plow a hole for the running back to follow through. Great quickness, great seals on the backside while pulling. I like him a lot. I think he's the ideal safe prospect in the teens, in the 20s if you're looking for an offensive lineman.
Yeah, no, he's really good. He's got a broad frame. He's got good thickness. I mean, he's a bulldozer. And I'm going to use that word again in a little bit for a different player, but he's so good. And he's a guy that I've been consistently projecting to go to the Eagles, and he can really be a good guy. Just move Landon Dickerson over to center to replace Kelsey, and he just kind of is an automatic replacement for Dickerson at guard. I just think that is the perfect fit, but he is an amazing guard. He's exactly what you want in that. Obviously he's had a history. He's got below average instincts in pass protection, but I feel like his hand placement and his other abilities are good enough to kind of overshadow that and keep him in contention for well, there's no way he's the top guard in the draft. Ike Ekwonu is the top guard in the draft, but he's easily a top 2 guard, top 5 offensive lineman, and I don't see him getting past the Eagles picks. I think once the Eagles get up there, if he's not gone already, he's gone to the Eagles.
Yeah, I really love him as fits for Washington to replace Brandon Sheriff immediately, or also the Eagles to replace, was it Brandon Brooks? I think he just retired.
Brandon Brooks too, yeah.
So it easily replaces him on the offensive line. And like you said, in the future allows Landon Dickerson to switch into center once Jason Kelsey, I think he's coming back for another year this year. But once he retires as well, I mean, they're set on the offensive line if they make that decision with 2 first-round picks. Why not just play for the future with one of them in Kenyon Green, where you're really set on the offensive line for years to come. But Washington as well, like I said, replaced Brandon Sheriff, a guy who you knew was going to be gone for years now, and you failed year after year to either make him your long-term, make him a long-term offer and get him under contract, but also they had like 2-3 years to find his replacement. They knew he was going to be gone, and they didn't do that. They still haven't done that. So now they can easily do it here with that first pick if they want to go that route. But Green, I like a lot. I talked about it, ideal prospect. I like him a lot in terms of what he can do. He's one of the most pro-ready guys in the modern NFL out of all the offensive linemen. Just level of consistency at multiple positions, does everything right. A great guy, athletic guy. A lot to like about him becoming a starter very quickly in the National Football League.
You don't talk about it often with offensive linemen, but you see guys like an Ike Ekwonu and an Evan Neal, and it's weird to say, but it's just Kenyon Green. He just doesn't have the flashiness that they do. You don't really talk about flashiness when you're talking about offensive linemen, but he's just kind of the stereotypical guard. He does what he needs to do, and he gets the job done. So he's obviously probably the most pro-ready out of all the guys. He just might not have the ceiling of everybody else. I don't really know if that's correct terminology I really want to use, but he's at the point where he can be a top guard. He can make a Pro Bowl pretty much right out the gate, and he can stay at that level the entire time, where the other guys, they're going to be good at the start, and they're going to keep rising. But no, it's exciting to see. I think he's a great fit for a lot of teams. And out of all of them, I think he will probably have the best or overall most consistent season.
Yeah, he for sure has the highest floor out of all these prospects and the lowest ceiling. I mean,
Yeah.
he's coming into it as already a pro-ready guy, like from the start. But like you just talked about with these other prospects, they have so much more room to grow, and it's hard to see how much more Kenyon Green is actually going to grow as a prospect. Once he gets into the league, for good and bad. I mean, he's there and he's ready, but once you get him in there, that's really what you're working with is what he is. So for a team that likes him for who he is, home run, ideal fit right off the gun for Kenyon Green.
Yeah, no question about it. I'm excited to watch him play.
All right, so Matt, it's time to talk about your guy, Trevor Penning. We'll bring him up. Go back to the tackles here out of UNI. This guy, a lot to like about him as well, and one that's starting to sneak in there from a lot of mock drafts. I had him in both of my mock drafts in the 20 range, but he's starting to get a little bit more buzz as of late. Again, 6'7", 321, more of that tackle size you would like to see, a big built guy, and overall an elite bender, combination of size, length, strength, awareness, very intriguing for a prospect going into the NFL draft.
This man is an absolute bulldozer. He has gained over 100 pounds since he started college. He is an absolute beast. He's got the quickness. He's got the athleticism. He's a great pull blocker. This man has everything that you want. Now, he hasn't played the same competition as everybody else. That's something that you're going to want to look at. But if you're just looking at his physicals, what he was able to do in college, and just the amount of growth that he's already made, you've got to see that this guy is still climbing and climbing and climbing. I love what he can do. I love what I think he can become. And I think he would be great. Now, he might not be a starting left tackle in the NFL right away. He might go to right tackle and start there. I don't really know. It depends on what you're looking at when you're drafting him at the time. But he can play either of those two tackle positions well. I think he'll be really good in the future. I think he ends up as a starting left tackle and a cornerstone left tackle in the future. But I could definitely see a team kind of starting him on the right side and slowly transitioning him over. So he probably has, out of the guys we've talked about, he's got the lowest floor, but I think he's got a pretty equal ceiling to most of them.
Yeah, this guy, I like him. I mean, there's a lot to like. I mean, he doesn't have my preferred versatility up front.
Yeah.
He's definitely going to be a tackle at best. And, like you said, probably a left tackle. I'm trying to pull up some of the starts he had. Yeah, one start in 2020, 6-game starter, 5 at left tackle, 1 at right tackle. It looks like in 2019, played 1 game at right guard, 14 at left tackle, in 15 games. So, yeah, this guy's going to be a left tackle when it's all said and done. I do have here pulled up an interesting quote from an NFC executive, from Lance Zierlein's scouting report, where an executive for an NFC team said, "Don't overthink it when you write him up. He's got size, length, toughness. He's smart. He works his tail off and loves to play football. That's what you look for in a starting left tackle." So obviously, someone in an NFC team loves this guy and has him high on their board, and I do as well. I think that he's a good fit for a lot of teams in the teens and the 20s looking for a tackle. I think a great fit would be my Green Bay Packers potentially, if he's the best player available option at tackle. If they want to get him to secure Elton Jenkins, more of a do-it-all and mostly guard kind of guy, and secure their 2 tackle spots. The same thing goes maybe for Tampa Bay. Secure an opposite tackle with Tristan Wirfs for the future of their team. But this is a guy who's an ideal prospect. I talked about it with Kenyon Green, Trevor Penning the same way. Out of a smaller school than the rest of these guys we've talked about, but still some smaller school guys we have to talk about coming out, especially the next guy. But Trevor Penning, he's an intriguing guy. I would love to keep an eye on once he gets into the NFL.
There's a lot of interesting teams you can look at here. You've got Houston at 13 with their second pick. If they decide not to go tackle with number 3, You can look at the Saints, where we were just talking about possibly a Charles Cross. But if he's off the board and they still want to go tackle, he could be an option. The Chargers, probably less of an option for tackle, but they're there. Pittsburgh at 20. There are a lot of teams that could be looking for top quality tackles to improve their offensive line quickly. And he could be a guy that fills that void. Because as you're talking about, you've got Charles Cross at a, really a stop at 15, that he's going to be gone by 15. Ickey and Evan Neal, they're going to be gone by pick 5. You're looking here, Kenyon Green, he's probably going to be gone by 15. You're looking at, he's the number 1 tackle once you get to the late teens. He's the guy that's going to be there. So it'll be interesting to see. But no, there are a lot of teams that could really use a guy that could make an immediate impact. And I think he's going to be the number 1 guy in a lot of teams' boards once you get into that position.
Interesting. And one thing that people do bring up with these FCS guys is level of competition. That's especially the case on the offensive line, and for potential first round pick. But what I like is the fact that he's got a maniacal, is what Lance Sterling described it as, maniacal work ethic. He talked about putting on 100 pounds of weight, entering college in the weight room. This is a guy where I think once he comes in, he's going to work to catch up. He's got a great ceiling on him. What you talked about with his floor and ceiling is 100% correct, in my opinion as well. And from what I've noticed looking at the guy, but I do like the work ethic. He's going to come in and put work in from day one to make sure he's ready to go once game time starts.
He's going to be that first guy in, last guy out kind of mentality. But no, I'm excited for him. He's got a lot of potential. Obviously, he's going to have to do a lot of work to really hit that ceiling that I think he has. But if he gets into the right situation, if the team gives him a chance, I think he can be something special.
All right, let's move on to another small school tackle, and Bernhard Raimann. Pulling it up here out of Central Michigan, the old Chippewas, Bernhard Raimann. Another one who's an interesting guy to consider, looking at some potential offensive tackles in this year's class. 6'7", 305. Got the height, but the size a little bit on the lower side. But in my opinion, one of the best, and probably the best, run blocker in this year's class. This guy is an absolute beast on the tape in the run game. What he did with the Chippewas was insane in the run game. Passing game, handled himself well, has a great core and balance and hand strength in him to really jump off the line. Very balanced and handle the speed rushers on the outside. The other thing with some of these plays and some of these highlights that I watched with Bernhard Raimann, when he landed a punch on some edge rushers, the play was just over for that guy. Whenever he got set and put his hands on a guy, it was over. Go ahead and chalk it up, go to the next play. That guy is going to get absolute dogged that next Monday and watching the film back by whoever his defensive line coach is over that play. The guy just ruins people on the edge. Occasionally gets a little too wide, which, with some issues with some swim type counter moves on the defensive line, kind of ate him up a little bit. I think, but you like when a guy gets too wide, in my opinion. They're eager. They're ready to get out there and just lay a hit on somebody. So you can teach that and groom that out in a guy like Bernhard Raimann.
No, I think he's a guy that's still growing. A lot of people forget that he is a former tight end and he transitioned into this tackle position. So he hasn't been playing this position his entire career. It's not like these other guys that we've been talking about where they were there and they just kept growing and growing and growing. He's kind of still in that growth phase. He has a ton of athleticism. He's got the ability. As you said, he's probably the best run blocker in this class. If he's already the best run blocker in this class, wait till he gets a little bit of technical fixing up at the NFL level. He could be really good in the passing game. So I'm excited for him. I think he has the potential to be a versatile guy. I think he can play inside as well if a team needs him to. I think he has that athletic background where he could potentially do that. But I do mostly see him as an outside guy. But no, he's one of those guys that I could see sneaking in late first round, um, and making an impact on a team. And for him, it'll be a playoff team at that point.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's you talked about. This guy's just now scratching his potential on the
Yep.
offensive line. I mean, he switched from tight end to tackle during the pandemic. I mean, in
Yep.
2020, and this guy is already being talked about as a potential first round pick at tackle. The effort that he put in is insane. Coming in just immediately being able to be a tackle and prove himself, and that he's ready for this position and what's ahead. So I would love to see just the story of him becoming a long-term left tackle in the National Football League would just be a great story for what he's gone through. The former Aussie is what I
Yeah.
like to bring up about him as well. But I mean, just the punch this guy has is just incredible. I love watching his film. I love watching guys that can absolutely just put their hands on someone and just end the play for them. It's just so fun to watch. There's a guy like that last year that I really liked as well that I can't quite remember who it was, but I'll see if I can bring it up. But I like Bernard Raymond a lot in terms of what he could become at tackle.
He's a really intriguing prospect. I think he just needs time. And I think it's going to be a team that has flexibility with that position that is going to end up taking a chance on him. So I'm excited. His instincts still need a little time to develop. But after that, he could be a really good tackle in the National Football League.
I'm trying to see who it was that was really high on last year. That was just an absolute. I think it was Tevin. Yeah, Tevin Jenkins.
Evan
Yeah,
Jenkins,
my
yeah.
scouting report
Oh,
first
that
sentence I had
guy.
on him was the biggest manhandling bully out of all the tackles, but dealt with some injuries last year. Um, once he got drafted, was it Chicago Bears? Tevin Jenkins.
Chicago Bears, yeah.
Yeah, but that guy when he would get the that's why I see in Bernard Raymond when he gets his hand on somebody, just destroying them and ending the play for him is what I love out of these tackle prospects going into it. And Bernard Raymond definitely has that factor that I really like, and also just the the athleticism. I mean, coming from tight end to tackle is just insane transition for me to really just consider and even put my mind to is what he was able to go through in that. But very well coached in that regard, very well developed in that regard, and a guy who I think should be flying up some boards for what he can do once he gets some NFL coaching in him.
Definitely.
All right, moving it along, we'll get to another interior offensive line prospect out of the ACC. We're going to go with Zion Johnson, pulling it up here out of Boston College. A guy who is 6'3", 316, great frame, great size, and strength to be a solid anchor at an offensive guard position. Just yet another guy who can squeak in the first round. Another one, like I just talked about with Raymond, very good in the run game, a lot more than he is in the pass game. This guy is a technical pulling guard, owns the speed to get to that second level to make the blocks needed in the run game, and be able to open up lanes. Worked and developed a little bit more in pass protection, which was good to see. This guy, he works on his craft at the end of the day, and there's a lot to like him in terms of being a perfect prospect of terms, personally what he can do, working to make himself better day in and day out.
Now, I think this is an intriguing prospect here, and I think he's a guy that could end up being a steal for a team late in the first round. He's really consistent with his play. He does lack that pass protection that you would like to see at the NFL level, but he has the chance to develop into a great NFL player. He does. He's a two-time team captain. He's got those leadership capabilities. He has experience playing the tackle position, which I know you like. You like that versatility. He played there a little bit in 2020. But no, I think overall he's a really good player. He could be a good fit for a team between probably 25 and 32. I see him. He could fall into that early second round, maybe. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see, but I think he could. He's most likely going to be a first round guy. Um, But no, I mean he's got occasional issues with some blitzes, and that's because of his lack of quickness, in my opinion. I just think he struggles on some of those speed rushers that he has to face. But other than that, I mean, he's a great quality player, and any team would be lucky to have him late in that first round.
Yeah, and you talked about some issues with some speed that he did have, and that mainly came during his stints on the outside.
Yep.
But what he is really good at is bull rushers on the inside. Guys like an Aaron Donald that he's going to have to be facing at defensive tackle if he lines up on the inside. He was able to just roll his hips and be a very heavy anchor against those kind of bull rush defenders that he's going to be facing. So I think he could be ready for it in that regard, and that's why I like him more as a fit, more on the inside than the outside. I think it's just his tangibles and his strengths really more align on the inside than the outside of the offensive line.
Yeah, no, I don't think there's any question he will play on the inside. And I think that's where he's going to end up staying. Obviously, teams are going to look at that and say, okay, maybe if we ever need him, he could play on the outside. He's got the experience, but he is an interior guy. That's what he does. He excels in the run game. He is going to need to improve that passing game, but it's going to be run game first for him. That's what it's going to be. But no, I'm excited to see what he can do. If he can gain a little bit more speed, that would be nice. I think getting speed is good for any interior guy. Trying to get to the outside on those stretch plays is going to be key for him. But if he can do that and he can consistently make strong plays in that regard, I don't see any issue with him being a good fit for starting position.
Well, let's move on to the last guy on our list, and then we'll throw in some potential honorable mentions. The sneaky guys we like to throw in at the end, just to watch out for, because there's always surprises in the first round of the NFL draft. So just a heads up. But our last guy on the list, a guy I've mocked in both of my first rounds, both times at 31 to the Cincinnati Bengals, is Tyler Linderbaum out of Iowa, who is the only center we've discussed today, and the best center in the class, by far at that position. But we got to talk about the centers as well, because they're the guys that get the plays started. So Tyler Linderbaum, pulling him up here. 6'3", 290 at center. Athletics is a big thing for him. Super athletic, very excellent awareness, and also just the intangibles that he has. A guy who, coming into the draft process, everyone was super high on as being, you remember the beginning of this process, everyone was like, Tyler Linderbaum is the best offensive lineman in this year's class, and then quickly just started falling down boards out of nowhere. But a guy who still could end up in the first round. I think the big thing about him is the arm length. That has been a huge knock against him. 31 and an eighth inch arms is something that, listening to some podcasts, reading some reliable sources that I have, just in the NFL, reading some things on Twitter about Tyler Linderbaum. That's a big knock that a lot of people have about him, and that some of the scouts and upper executives are trying to figure out if they can get over that or not when looking at Tyler Linderbaum.
I mean, Tyler Linderbaum, he's got the leadership capabilities. He's got the technical abilities. The question is, does he have the physicality? Does he have the physicals that an NFL team wants in the starting center? He's a little undersized. He's got small arms. It's just something that teams are going to have to weigh against other positions that they could fill. Now, do I think he's a first-round talent? Yes. Do I think that he can be a starting center and a really good starting center for a team, especially like the Bengals? Yes. I like that a lot. It's just we're not NFL GMs. We don't make those decisions. They're the ones that have to make the money decision. And typically, centers aren't the big money move. So if you have any doubts about him, you're most likely going to pass on him and go for an edge rusher, a receiver, a corner, someone that is going to make an impact. People are going to know their names. So it'll be interesting. I think that's something that is going to be a knock on him. But in my opinion, he's a first-round talent. He's a top 5, 6 offensive lineman in this class. But he's just going to have to hope that NFL GMs and NFL scouts see that and take the risk on him.
Yeah, I think that the issue with Tyler Linderbaum, for what he is, he's great.
Yeah.
But do they value what he is as a prospect? What he is physically at the position? That's the big knock on Tyler Linderbaum, because what he is great. But he is what he is. I mean, there's not he has the
You
things
can't
you
do
can't
anything. Yeah.
change, the things you can't teach for a prospect, and that's the big issue with him. Because I mean, for his size, he does great things with his strength against
Yeah.
some of these defenders. But it's just so weird. It's just one of those things where it's the guys making the decisions are the ones who are making the decisions. Because, like you said, I also agree that he's a first round talent. But I do think on April 28th, we could see Tyler Linderbaum's name not get called in the first 32 selections.
And I mean, that's everybody's used to that. He's a center. You just like running backs, you don't typically draft running backs in the first round, even though they could be the most talented player in the draft. It just doesn't really happen that often. You're going to go for the guys that are going to make an impact right at the beginning. They're going to make the money in the end, and they're going to be the flashy guys scoring the touchdowns. Centers don't do that. They might create the touchdown sometimes. And without them, you don't get to play football. But, in the end, it is what it is. I'm excited to see what player he becomes. I hope he gets that first round pick. I really hope he does. But in the end, he's going to be counting on every single team that passes him up, and he is going to make them pay in the end.
I really love Lance Zierlein, including the sources tell us section of his scouting reports. Because for Tyler Linderbaum, he has a quote from a pro personnel director for another NFC team, where the quote says, "Really fun tape. He's going to be really hard to beat to the spot, but he's just a small man by our standards, and that worries me." And that's just the thing. I mean, the guys making the decisions are the guys making the decisions. And there's just things with Tyler Linderbaum, the negatives that can't be changed, that are really hurting his stock right now. But that's the last one we have as a potential first-round prospect. Just some sneaky ones to consider. 3 other ones that we've seen in some mocks in the first round. Darian Kinnard out of Kentucky. A huge guy who just swallows defenders, very explosive kind of guy. Daniel Falele out of Minnesota, another guy who is just an absolute mauler. Is my first line I have on him, but 6'9", 380, a huge, just behemoth guy on the offensive line. And then Tyler Smith out of Tulsa as well, great hands, good length, and great build as well. Do you have anything?
No, I'm excited. I mean, I think those are the guys that you're really going to be looking at. I like Daniel Falele. I think he could be a guy that sneaks into that first round. Do I think it's going to happen? No. I think there are a lot of talented guys at the offensive line position that are going to go above him. But he's a definite second round pick. He's going to be early in the second round, depending on how many players do go in that first round. I'm excited for him. He is a behemoth. He's huge. And that teams are going to love that. And he's going to be a guy that gets a lot of value in that second round. So look out for him as potential second round picks for your guys' teams. But no, I think overall this class is just it's deep. It's deep. It's heavy at the top. And a lot of teams are going to be really happy with their selections.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of value with some of these day 2 guys on the offensive line that teams are going to be happy with. That slid out of the first round. They didn't have to waste a first round selection to still get a quality starter on their offensive line. They're still going to be able to find that, and so I like a lot about this position in this year's class, or position grouping in this year's class, are the big boys up front. So Matt, that's all we got for this week. Breaking down the big boys for what's to come on the show. We're quickly approaching draft day, so we're going to have to be moving to 2 weeks for the next 2 weeks leading up to the April 28th deadline of the first round to cover some of these defenders. So what do you want to start on? We'll go on Wednesdays and Friday for next week, if that's good with you, potentially. So what do you want to start on first with these defenders? Start with some edge rushers potentially?
I mean, I think we start with flashy guys. I think we go the edge rushers. Talk about potential 2 top 4 picks in the draft. I like that idea.
All right, so next Wednesday, we'll be back here on the Slaw Sports Show to discuss the edge rushers and then continue on with the rest of these defenders leading up to the NFL draft. Matt, thank you as always.
Thank you.
All right, that's it for today on the Slaw Sports Show. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you all for listening. If you miss any part of today's episode, it will be posted on the YouTube channel as soon as we wrap up, so you can go back and check everything out. Or if you don't have the time, or you're more of a podcast listener, the episode will also be posted on the podcast tomorrow at the Slaw Sports Show. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor, Overcast, anywhere you get a podcast, you'll find us at the Slaw Sports Show. So as always, thank you all for listening. Thank you all for watching. And until next time, peace.